Hi guys, welcome to another video of Coding Freaks. Today I'm going to talk about OpenAI in general and some news on .NET 9 regarding OpenAI you probably heard of, and basically some stuff which is old like .NET 8, and I want to show how to configure or one way to configure OpenAPI in .NET 8 and then in .NET 9. I want to do it in a big one step, starting with .NET 8 and then heading over to .NET 9 so that you can follow up the whole story. My basic claim will be that actually not much changed. Not much, a little bit changed, but not much. And I want to demystify like the situation. People approached me and said, well, you know, you should make a video because it's kind of mysterious to us what happened there, what exactly changed, and so on. And I want to do that. In order to do it, however, I have to do the big circle, you know, and as always, this is going to be probably a long video. Maybe I split it up in two. I will see. And yeah, I prepared some presentation I want to start with. And to start with a disclaimer, maybe before I show the presentation, is this is not a comprehensive guide. And this is at some points it's heavily opinionated. So I will show you how I do it, how I or my company approaches that, and you can cherry pick whatever is useful for you, of course. And you can hit me in the comment section and tell me what you think about it, and maybe I'll do another follow-up or whatever. And maybe I will split this into two videos. I don't know yet. Depends on how long it gets. And with that, all disclaimer stuff, let's get started with the presentation. So, .NET 9 OpenAPI is the cover of all of this. And we're going from .NET 8 to, with Swagger, to .NET 9. Actually, the title is not pretty well. As I see it now, it should be .NET 8 plus Swashbuckle, and then to .NET 9. So let's see. So what's going on? So I showed two things. The classic way with .NET 8, classic in quotation should be, and the new way with .NET 9. What's in it? In the .NET 8 world, I will start by looking at the default template you get from Microsoft, explain why I don't like it, and what you should change and why. And then from that we go to stuff like including XML docs, what it even is. And this is a big mystery. If you look into Stack Overflow and other sites, a lot of people ask about it, and I will show some approaches to it. OIDC as an example for authentication using Entra ID. This whole Coding Freaks blog, as you know, is about how to do it in a professional environment, enterprise environment, whatever. And I'm a Azure guy, as you might know, and so I think authentication should be done explicitly with OpenID and not just saying Barra token and that's it. That's why I want to show it an example of Entra ID. And then API versions. Which means I want to show how to not only provide an API, but make it a little bit resistant to upcoming changes in the future, and I will show that. Also then on .NET 9 side, I will use the same solution technically, which I will share, by the way, on GitHub. You will see the link. And then using that solution, from there I will move over to .NET 9. So I keep everything nearly as it is on the left side here of that chart, but only nearly. And then, yes, I will even show OIDC with Entra ID, which is peculiar because if you look in the current state as of recording 2025 January, it's now, the Microsoft documentation is kind of silent about how to do a little bit more sophisticated stuff with authentication on the new world, and I will show that as well. Disclaimers are, no limits so far. I also will show, because I detected some limits on .NET 9 implementation, and I will show you that as well. So it's highly opinionated, as I said. It's incomplete probably, and as always, it's exhaustive and long. I know that it wouldn't be Coding Freaks if it's not long videos. So that's what I do. What should I do? My channel, my rules, I guess. So let's go. So what's going on? The old way. What do I mean? So first of all, the old way is you generate a web API project, or you take an existing one, you just include Swashbuckle from NuGet, and you call services at swaggergen, and then optionally use Swagger, or then you call use Swagger, you have to call it, I think, and then use Swagger UI. So, and then you start this thing and visit the /swagger endpoint, and then you have an UI, wherever that comes from. I will explain that in a second. So next thing on the old way is, what is @swaggergen doing? @swaggergen is just preparing the dependency injection for all kinds of needed dependencies so that Swashbuckle can actually generate and serve later Swagger related stuff like the Swagger JSON and the /swagger. So then use Swagger is there to actually inject the middleware of Swagger into the ASP.NET Core middlewares and to serve the Swagger JSON file while your app is running, so that the Swagger JSON is actually delivered through your API. And then of course use Swagger UI is just a step to say, hey, inject also the /swagger endpoint, that when I hit this endpoint, something is shown, a UI is shown. There is no endpoint you can inspect in your application which is saying /swagger, so this is a dynamically generated web page. The moment you hit it, it actually generates and formats and whatever this whole nice UI and displays it to the user. This is all included in the Swashbuckle ASP.NET package. So to summarize this, the first two steps here, actually, they are the generating stuff. They are needed so that a Swagger JSON is, or whatever, a JSON is exported. And I'm corrected myself because actually Swashbuckle, the package, is not only generating Swagger JSON, which is a format nowadays people moved away from to describe the APIs. Now we use OpenAPI. And this is nothing new to .NET 9. You need to understand, this is like Swashbuckle did it for a long time and generated by default even OpenAPI conformant JSON files. So OpenAPI isn't new. The approach to generate it and how to do it and where do you need a Swashbuckle package or don't need, this is new in .NET 9. So, and then this step is optional because you could have perfect generation of Swagger JSON without the UI. No problem. It will still generate the Swagger JSON, okay? And because this is a little bit complicated to demonstrate only with PowerPoint, let's do a demo of that. Just a quick out, file new project demo to demonstrate all of that. So I go over to Visual Studio here and I will create a new project, and then I will select ASP.NET Web API. Go ahead. Let's call it, I don't know, API sample. We will delete that later next. And then I will stick to .NET 8 because I want to show you the old way. I will configure HTTPS, but no container support. And here I will tell them, yes, I need OpenAPI support. Okay, this is where the .NET 8 world would bring in Swashbuckle as a NuGet dependency in order to fulfill this requirement. And then use controllers. I personally like controllers more over the new minimal APIs, which is when you unclick it, it's minimal APIs new. It's not new anymore. I just recognize it's pretty old. .NET 8 brought it. I don't like it for reasons, but it's taste. You totally can do all of that without this checkbox. I will use the checkbox throughout my tutorial. And I will not hit aspire for reasons. Okay. Let's generate this, and what you're confronted with is a project template, which I'm highly critical about. I will tell you more about that in a second, but it works. So meaning if I do nothing and hit F5 here, and let's debug this, and I will explain why this works and how this works in a second, but it should open up a browser and it should serve a /swagger file here. And this is not the important stuff. So as I said, /swagger is a generated HTML with injected JavaScript and stuff. All of that is configurable. There are deep configuration options inside of Swagger UI to even inject your own CSS and stuff like that. The important thing is this file. So let me copy this link in the new browser, which I open. Let's show that. So this is the file, and I will leave that browser open. This file is interesting because it shows you actually Swashbuckle is not generating Swagger JSON, it's generating OpenAPI JSON, version 3, which is pretty current. So it has some path specification, which means paths is another word for endpoints. So every method, public method, which has an HTTP or whatever attribute is an endpoint. We call that an endpoint API-wise. On OpenAPI, it's a path. So every endpoint gets its own path, and we only have one path because this is a sample, like /weather forecast. Okay. And then it has components, which currently consist only schemas. In other words, models. This is like, there is this weather forecast model, which is described here in OpenAPI syntax. And this is what is kind of, components is kind of a library of things, which is available in this OpenAPI schema. And then things can reference this library. You can see that here on the weather forecast, it's doing $ref things, which in OpenAPI language means this is like a pointer to something at this path, like this document in the component schemas point to weather forecast. So here you go, it points down here to that thing. All of that is generated by Swashbuckle, looking into your .NET code while your app is starting up. How does it work? So let's stop my application. You may be familiar, but still I want to summarize this. Let me quickly format it with my resharper and get rid of some stuff. I hate blank lines. So in case you didn't know, so I explained that for a second. I go the big circle, as I said. So blank lines is useless in source code in general, not only .NET, in my opinion, because a blank line should show you something else is happening now. This is a structure for itself. So I'm claiming, so I use a blank line. A blank line is a strong indicator that you need a command line. That's what I'm saying. So don't let me guess why you put in a block like that or whatever. Makes no sense. Just put in a command. This is di config, for instance, and put in this is app startup config, whatever, or middleware config, actually. So now I know what you're up for. Okay, so just a side note. For reasons I never totally understood. Microsoft says Swagger JSON generation, so this should generate the JSON file at runtime, and this is the Swagger UI configuration. Is disabled if you're not on development mode, and I will talk of is development as well, in case you don't know what this means. But anyway, I don't know why they hide the Swagger on integration test or production stages or whatever. If you know why, just write it down in the comments if you have a good reason. I guess it's for security reasons, but you know, I kind of get the point that you don't just help attackers to explain them what your paths are, what you are providing and so on. But on the other side, I'm thinking it's kind of security by obscurity, trying to hide this, kind of telling the attacker or malicious actor, whatever, oh, this is what we provide, and you shouldn't know what we provide because the methods and the data and whatever could point you what this is, point you to effect. But to be honest, security-wise, this is not very strong because there are sophisticated tools which can still knock on all the doors and get what you're doing. And to prohibit that, you need to do other measures. However, I don't think that this is a big security upscaling, so I'm not sure about that. I sometimes use the Swagger because it's more convenient, sometimes not. I don't know, to be honest. I don't know. If you will disable that in running environments, let's say in Azure, what you usually do is you disable it, but then you have something like API management in place in Azure, which still gives you this experience. So kind of, this is why I think in development mode it's enabled, but otherwise it's not, I guess. Okay, so besides of that, what happens? So here I'm using controllers, as you can see here. That is why he needed to add that, because I'm not using minimal API, which is this app map get, app map post, which you see in more modern templates. Then he adds the endpoints API Explorer, which we come to in a second, which is a .NET internal thing, ASP.NET, which says, okay, this is basically the thing that is able to inject a service, which later can be used to say, hey, give me all the endpoints, the versions of the endpoints, we come to that later, which are available in this application. This is what this gives it. And then it finally adds Swagger generation to call Swashbuckle to tell it, hey, now go there and inject all the stuff you need to in order to generate the Swagger JSON. And then it uses two middlewares, which is Swagger and Swagger UI. If you want to use Swagger UI, you need this middleware, but you totally can run the middleware for generating the Swagger JSON without showing the UI. So if I now play this again, it should go to 404. I don't know what you mean. You can go. So Swagger / Swagger is no longer served, but my other browser here still points to this. Where is it? Here. And I still can F5 and reload this because the Swagger JSON still is generated, right? So that is here in order to show you that what I showed you in the presentation, you don't need to have the UI in place for the Swagger JSON to be generated. The UI is just the sugar on the cake, if you will. So let's close the browsers here, and that is enough for the sample or explanation. Now let's talk about what I don't like. So the first thing I don't like about this template, and you will see me now switch over in a second to my source, of which you can see in GitHub as well. The first thing is it's kind of cluttered around. So first things first, what I would expect from Microsoft is to bring some order here to, for instance, generate a models directory and move this into the models and then have it this way. That will be an easy improvement, because now if you look at this, you easily can see 3 top level citizens here, which are the most important stuff. And then you have more order. My first improvement. The next thing is, I'm not a big fan of this thing. I know what this is. This is a good idea of Microsoft because you can go to the Endpoint Explorer here, which is a window you can open, and it will have this in place. And you can, I think you can, is it double click, generate request, whatever. No, generate request was wrong. I think you can just open an editor. You can then run this endpoints against your API, and it will then give you the option to test your APIs right from this window in your project. Turns out, most of the time it doesn't work. Simple reason, I don't know, or here's send request, you can do it. It internally runs this, awaits a response, and then, yeah, of course. So maybe this, I just run it. Let me see if this is now working. And I send request, and I get here in Visual Studio this stuff. So here you can see how to use it without this interference as this thing opens. So I wanted to explain what this development mode means. So here it says is development, right? Let me do this side road real quick. So is development is pretty much the only thing it checks is there an environment variable? There are certain environment variables like .NET underscore environment, and for website specific ASP.NET underscore environment. If this is set to development, then this extension method is development will return true. Question is, how does it work? Simple answer is, if you hit this play button, you can see there are a lot of profiles somewhere coming from. And in case you didn't know, this has come from this properties file, launch settings, property launch setting, and this is where some stuff is done. So let's remove some stuff. We don't need HTTP. We only want HTTPS. We don't need IS Express. So here are the 3 still. If I now save this file, it reloads this, and the only thing which is left is this HTTPS here. This is what you see. Okay, so here you control how you can debug locally. So what this does is it sets here, before it runs the application, the process, it sets its environment, and one thing it does, it sets the ASP.NET Core _ environment variable to development. So this is actually the only place where it actually decides to go to development. And that is why here this will be true whenever you run it from Visual Studio or whatever environment you have. So that's the reason. The launch settings is the whole magic. Okay, so then when I hit F5, he goes to Swagger because I said launch the browser as soon as you're ready. And now I can say false. Don't do that. Just don't launch the browser, which is better, because now when you go here and play, it's now running. And when you stop it, you don't close the browser session. You can still go in a fresh browser and go to Swagger. I re-enabled it. But now when I stop it, it's no longer closing my browser session. So when I restart it, I still am in my last browser session. So let me show you. I just made a request. Here it is. Now I go back, stop the thing. The website is still open. Nice. And now I can go play again. And nothing happens. This is calm. And then I can execute here. Or I can go to the Endpoint Explorer and go here. Where was it again? I forgot. Where's my, to that file here, and send the request from in Visual Studio, and all is good. Problem is, this works fine if you do a plain sample, and it's nice that it's possible in that editor format. The problem with that is, one of the problems is that it doesn't work if you have authorization headers. It doesn't work very well with authorization headers because, you know, if you switch on authorization authentication, then this thing would need to add a bearer token, which needs to first be generated. And you don't, as far as I know, have a lot of injection points here. So that is why I'm saying good idea, but only for pretty simple scenarios. That explains why my next optimization is to simply remove this file. I don't need it. I'm not saying it's bad, I'm just saying I don't need it. Okay, now to my biggest critique point. And that is this controller. And this controller, in my opinion, is all over the place. First thing is, the most obvious thing, it kind of shows dependency injection here, right? It's dependency injecting the iLogger. Okay. And then it stores it in a private variable. Okay. But it never uses this logger. So the whole thing is kind of obsolete because we are now injecting something, making this more cluttered than it should be. And in fact, the same currently, because we don't use the logger to log anything, currently the easiest way to simplify this controller is to simply remove the logger. Okay. By the way, it's a good idea not to log inside, usually inside of your controllers, to log something like, hey, the GET request is coming in. No, don't do it, because if you implement the default logging, which comes from ASP.NET Core, you can have all of that GET blah, blah, blah logging out of the box. It's already there. So ASP.NET, if you wanted to, logs all of this somewhere. So then people approach me and say, yeah, but maybe I want to log what's happening here and if there's an exception and so on. And I say, yeah, well, that's because this template also is badly designed. Let's go into it, my opinion. First things first, it is using this technique, which I don't like, to directly return .NET types. It's possible, it works, as you see, it's returning .NET types. So first thing is, don't do that. You should do return action result or iAction result or whatever, because this now is a built-in type of ASP.NET Core saying this is the equivalent to an HTTP response. This is what action result represents actually in .NET. And now you say something like var result equals, you just do the .NET code to generate your result, and then you can say return OK the result. This OK method is inherited from controller base, the type you're inheriting from in your controller. And now this gives you the option and full control over the HTTP response. It will be in, let's say, in terms of the actual API result, this is my result I had. I got a 200 with this. And if I re-execute it, nothing changed. It's still a 200 with data, with JSON data, because it still gets converted by the ASP.NET Core response middleware that detects this an INumberable weather forecast and returns it. Okay, so first thing, use action result or iAction result, let's say the interface, as a wrapper for whatever you're returning from your API, and be explicit here with OK. And there are other methods like not found, bad request, whatever. Okay, that's the first thing. The next thing I don't like is, but this is a .NET internal, there's a book, I have it in my shelf, and it says Framework Design Guidelines. Yeah, this is from Microsoft, guys. And one thing it tells you is, you should not, if you're not explicitly want somebody to for each or over something, return something like that, INumberable. INumberable is explicitly there, so you can do an for each, and there's even this keyword yield and so on and so on. This is not good. So even better would be to do the more simpler thing, in my opinion, to explicitly say this is an array, and they did already array. You see that? This is from the sample. They already converted the enumerable explicitly to an array. So why would I return the INumberable if I would say this is an array? The difference is, this is .NET-wise saying, this is something which is, by definition, first of all, not immutable, but not designed to add or remove stuff. I know that this is going to be JSON, and it doesn't matter anywhere. But we are .NET guys. We want to do nice APIs. And look, this is far more expressive, saying this is just an array of this thing. And the last and most important critique point over this, I will not show it in this, but in my prepared example, is that this and this is actually logic. This is what we consider business logic, or at least repository, if you will, or whatever. And now what Microsoft is showing here, that they happily mix logic and controller. And this is a direct violation of separation of concern, in my opinion. So the argument probably goes at Microsoft, yes, but we wanted to make the template as simple as possible. And that is why I directly judge to be not a good idea. So this as simple as possible culture, let me do this sidetrack as well currently, which is all over the place, and as simple as possible, like the APIs with our controllers and stuff like that. I don't know if that is the way we should approach, to be honest, because it gives you quick results, but it leaves people puzzled about why is it not good to do it this way. And in my job as a consultant, I constantly have to tell people, please don't inject like the entity framework context here in the controller, although Microsoft is showing it all over the place, because what you actually build, like architecture wise in the development thing, is like monoliths. It's just everything is in the API. Unit testing will get hard. Replacing the stuff will get hard, and it makes me questioning why we even have dependency injection in place when we kind of just inject the context like hell and don't have any logic. So what I would suppose is that Microsoft, I don't know, it won't happen probably. Let me stay this clear, because who am I? But I want to tell at least my community that I'm not a big fan of that. Here and there I dropped stuff like that, but now is the time to explicitly tell you why. And with that, I will open my example to show you kind of the difference. And I will hop over and prep everything there, and then I will come back. So here we are. I just opened my proposal for a solution. I will guide you through this. There's a lot of stuff to discover, which I would do. And again, all the structure is still just showing the basic example. Before I go to that, let me show you the outcome so that you might decide if you're interested in this section. If not, you can skip forward or go to the second part if it's another video, because this now is the full-fledged sample having multiple API versions here in term. It has still a generated Swagger JSON, but it now has operation IDs, which the default Swagger does not have. It has contact information here about every version. It has descriptions coming from the C# summaries. So XML comments file is included. It has also descriptions of possible outcomes, like not only 200, but like descriptions coming from my controller, which I overworked. And it has Azure authorization, including, as you can see, I'm already logged in using OAuth 2, which is the fact because I decided to store my authentication data here. I can log out. I can select my oh, my scope is not here. I just see that if I authorize now, the scope is invalid. I need to fix that in a second. But basically it works. And yeah, let me fix that real quick. I just come back. So I really quickly fixed that off screen. So now just a demo, if I authorize, he says, okay, you can select the scopes you want to use. Here's my scope now, authorize. I'm authorized against Entra ID. And now when I try my API out, I have a location to pass, which is, I don't know, Denver, execute. And it goes to create a request with a nice API. And then it has an authorization barrel token in it, and I get results. So basically this is what I explain now step by step, how to reach all that, and what it means, and what it means OpenAPI wise, and so on. So feel free to skip that if you want to, but if you're interested on how I did it, here it goes. So let me concentrate first on those projects. So I told you guys that I want to use this solution to show you the old way, like the .NET 8 way, and the .NET 9 way in one solution. And in order to do that, the first mystical thing about this, or maybe kind of unusual thing, is that here, if I look inside of this, there's some stuff which is a little bit unusual. The first thing is, I'm not having a target framework pointing to a single .NET framework I want to build this logic for. I go what this is in a second. All those logics are built to be reused by this project and the upcoming one, which will use .NET 9. This project is .NET 8. It has target framework and then only one framework. It's .NET 8 to ensure that I show you the old way. But this project here is compilable for both frameworks, .NET 8 and .NET 9. So depending on what I start later on, it will do this automatically. So that's the first thing. It's valid for all those things here. And as you can see, if I switch through all the .NET CS project files, if you pay attention to root namespace and assembly name on top of here, nothing changes really. The whole section here on front is kind of the same, as you can see here. Nothing changes really. So that is because I'm using MS-build variables to actually say, for instance, my root namespace, and this is something you can do in other projects all over the place. So if you have a solution, and kind of every project should share like the MS-build project name, which is this part, logic interfaces, logic models, logic weather mock, whatever. This is then injected here during build time in order to generate on those two positions the right value. So I don't have to, when I create new projects, I don't have to replace this. It's always built by MS-build. So the other interesting thing is that if you look into logic models, it has something here, the documentation file. We come to that point later. And this now uses like also built-in variables like configuration, which is debug or release here on top. It will replace depending on what I build. And then target framework. If you look at this path, this is basically the bin folder into which the DLL is generated. But what I do is I tell him, please, .NET, generate a documentation file. This is an XML file, and name it the same. This property is targeting this variable. So in case you didn't know, the C's project file is MS-build kind of programming language. There's a guy called Said Ibrahimi, which you can watch or look over at GitHub, YouTube, and so on. And he's the Microsoft go-to guy for MS-build. If you want to learn how to utilize MS-build files for you, he's probably a good idea. Okay, that was that. And so main point to keep here is that I used the sample from Microsoft and extracted all of the stuff into a solution structure. So what I have is I have an interface. It's called iWeatherService, and this interface defines only one method, which says I will return a value task. So it's an async method, forecasts, but it's a value task of read-only collection. So as I said earlier, it's not a good idea to return enumerables if you're not going to enumerate them. And so in order to avoid confusing, I'm tending to use read-only collection to say this is something which is not supposed to be mutated. So this read-only collection ensures could be the toList as read-only extension method generates it for you. You will see that this is what this does, and it returns a read-only collection of weather forecasts. This is what I do. I could do array as well, but because I don't know if this interface is used by maybe other parts of this, I just want to tell .NET, hey, this is a bunch of weather forecasts which you are not intended to mess with when you retrieve it from the weather forecast logic. This is how I do it. I also, as you can see, try to add summaries everywhere. I might have forgot it here and there, but you will see why this is important. Then I have some models. I have a weather forecast model, also with summaries, which is exactly the model you saw. Not exactly, kind of the model you saw. The same calculations going on, but I added the summaries, which I must say I would expect Microsoft to add those summaries, but they kind of go away from all the C# stuff. I don't like that, but it is what it is. Also, I have some options model here. We come to that later. And I have then a mock implementation. It's just a type which implements iWeatherService and then does here the enumerable range to the same like Microsoft did, converting it to a list in order to be able to call the asRead-only extension method. So that is a read-only collection of weather forecast. And then I use value task, which is kind of new thing. You don't need to generate task. You can use value task when you say I have a task which returns something. And then it might be a good idea to use value task. Okay, so that is my implementation, and basically it does the same currently like the example from Microsoft. But now the good thing about it is my controller now. Let's look at my weather forecast controller, and it has some stuff regarding versioning. I'll come to that later. It now just injects the weather service, and this needs to have a summary, but anyways, this is now using DI for not the logger, but my logic. And then I use this to have a very, very simple, straightforward, stupid, dumb controller method, which has separation of concern, because this controller now does not care what kind of weather service that is. Could be any iWeather service, happens to be mock, but doesn't have to. And then I just retrieve forecasts and return them, having a value task here as well, because action result also is a value. And now I have get next day's async, passing in the location and ensuring that the path is not question mark location equals, but giving him a route pattern for that this way. Also, I'm having this option to inject status code descriptions. You saw that already in the documentation. Okay, so also I have here my documentation file in place, the same as I showed you in the models. This is .NET 8, not multiple things, and it uses some NuGet packages. I come to that later as well. Also interesting is here that I have app settings in place, which Microsoft also is missing. They don't need it really, but you know, it's a nice thing. So this one is the default thing which you have from your NuGet package. Let me show you Microsoft Identity Web. So if you have Microsoft Identity Web, and this brings in opportunities for authentication authorization, and then I just have the app settings and I'm using Azure AD, and then I'm bringing in some basic things, and all the other stuff is coming from app secrets, usersecrets.net. I will put that in the README later of that file, what you need to do before you run this locally in your machine. And here I'm using the user secrets ID. You will have the same. You have to do some commands before you run this on your machine, but then it should run. Okay, so that about the controllers, but of course the interesting part is how did I set up Swashbuckle? And if I open the program file, you will kind of be a little bit surprised probably because it's very, very dense. So as you can see, it has some usings here because I did something, and then it's pretty plain. It does a lot of stuff, but it's, in my opinion, pretty good readable in terms of that I wrote extension methods. I will show them, of course, to you. I wrote extension methods so that I don't clutter and fill this file, because the purpose of this file is to show me what happens when. This is what we need to concentrate here, especially when it comes to middleware injection. And I have a video out there about middleware. You can find it on my channel. But especially when it comes to middleware injection, it really matters in which order you inject middleware in order to get the right experience. So what you want to do here, you want to concentrate on the right thing. So this file tells you, the less code you have in this file, the better it is, I would say, and when it comes to debugging. So that is why I decided not to have all the configuration in one file, which is very long, but to write my own extension methods. So basically, the first thing is, first of all, I add a scoped dependency injection for my weather service. You saw that, and it's happened to be the mock weather service. Okay, nice. Then I use the controllers because as I said, I'm using controllers. So this is default. Also default is this guy. So what this brings in, because I want to use Entra ID for authorization and authentication, this is the extension method coming from Microsoft Identity Web. Here's the thing from the NuGet package. And by default, if you name something Azure AD, which is kind of funny because Azure AD, of course, is not longer the name of Entra ID. So probably I should rename it. But anyways, you pass in the configuration, which points, in my case, to a mix of app settings, environment variables, user secrets, and so on. This is kind of a cool system. The configuration brings everything together, configuration manager. And now when I pass that to the web, to this extension method, it wires everything together. Looking into app settings, looking for Azure AD section here in the app settings, and then it understands what to do. I'm using Pixie, PKCE, in order to have a more secure authorization flow. I can read it up. This all is default options documented by Microsoft. This is this options identity, Microsoft Identity Options is a thing which comes out of it. And yeah, this is also, I could put that to the top so that everything which is, so now this section says doing OpenAPI and Swagger config injections. Okay, this is now coming up. So this is written by me. So at API versioning, the first thing is pretty important. So this is only there in order to tell ASP.NET Core, not Swagger, ASP.NET Core, that we want to version our API. So what I do here is I pass in Swagger options. So the Swagger options are those things here from the models, which is just a POCO, a plain old CLR object having some properties. And one of those properties is an array of numbers with the supported versions. Looking back into my app settings, you can see here that I have an array called versions having 1 and 2. So I'm skipping here the minor versions and I'm only dealing with major version 1.0, 2.0. In order to make it happen, this type also has a calculated property converting this versions array, which has numbers, into something which comes from a Microsoft package. To be honest, this ASP versioning abstractions package, which has this API version thing, which is not being able to serialize directly or deserialize from JSON. This is why I do 1.0, 2.0, whatever from my array. So this is what I really need later, API versions. And then I also have a contact, and all of those properties map directly to whatever I have in my app settings. So having this in place, what I can do when I re-execute that, he obviously takes it in from the app settings. Let me see. As you can see, this information, my API, YouTube sample API, whatever, he's missing Coding Freaks here. The contact information is not shown, but I think it's in the Swagger JSON. Yeah, contact name is here. You see, Coding Freaks. So all of that is passed in using values from my app settings. So what this enables me to do now is I can copy this to my app settings development and later to my other stuff. And I can say, well, actually, if it runs in development, just rename my API. So if I run it now on development mode, it will say my development API here. And this is how I can utilize this .NET configuration system to make more and more, bring more and more value into my experience with OpenAPI. Okay, so but where were we? We were currently not at, we just made this excursion to tell you this is how API versioning is happening. In order to do that, there are some NuGet packages which you need on .NET 8. I'm not sure if you need them on 9. We will see when we hit that. But you have versioning and versioning API Explorer, which are needed so that you can utilize all this versioning logic. As soon as you have those packages in, you can use that on your service collection to add versioning capability. So first you add it. And here you can see that I'm going into my options, which are my Swagger options. I showed you saying the fallback version should be the biggest version, so 2.0 in my thing, and tell him that when no version is specified, he use the default API version and that he should consider the versions. And then I add the API Explorer, which is kind of a middleware, which gives other components ability to, and the router and everything to ability to see the versions. And then I just say what should be the format, how I format my so-called group. A version is then a group, lowercase v, and then the version number, and substitute API version in URLs, please. And as soon as I have this in place, all I need to do is go to the controllers, for instance, and add a route here, which is a little bit different. So I decided to have everything under API /, and then I do a lowercase v, and then I put this calculated string in, which you get from this API versioning. You just say version API version is always the same, and it will do the v1, v2, and whatever v's you have here, using the format you considered here, like the major version, v1, v2. So as I said, this is not true. I will use major only. So this is what I do. Having that in place, now I have versioning on my controllers. And why would I need versioning? It's very important also for Swagger and for OpenAPI. It is because you might hit a point in your development of the API where you need to generate a breaking change or to introduce a breaking change in your API. But on the other side, to go forward in making progress in your app. But on the other side, you want usually to be able to serve all the clients still with valid data. In order to do that, you need to create a new version at this point in time, version 2, leaving version 1 alone so that other clients are not hitting any problems. And this is not everything you need to do. Of course, you need to take care of your models to reflect breaking changes in the models. You usually have to duplicate the models. Let's say if there is a field going away or whatever, you renamed a field, whatever breaking change it might be. But this is the starting point. First, your API needs to support that. And this is how you start. Here you have it now. In the source code, you do it. I have this extension method. And all you need to do basically to get the same result that I have here is to copy this code over. You can totally do it and then use add API versioning internal, passing in the Swagger options, meaning the thing which we generated with this extension method, get Swagger options. What is this? This is just a helper method here in configuration extensions, because also a problem a lot of people have. At this point in time, when I inject services, I don't have access to all the options here which are in my Swagger options. Later here I can access those using dependency injection, but at this point in time the app is not yet built, and that is why I cannot get out the options easily. So that is why I use this kind of thing. It's not the, something you should overuse, but this is a really straightforward thing. It uses the iConfiguration, so the configuration manager, searches for the Swagger section, and then retrieves it, parsed into Swagger options, the same I did with Microsoft Identity options in case I need it, and I will need it. So this is API versioning internal. So after API versioning is brought in, all I need to do is add another, or all I need, now comes the heavy lifting. So now buckle up. Now I want to do Swagger gen. So I'm not calling add Swagger gen, I'm calling my extension method, which is a little bit more complicated. Here you go. It's in the service collection extensions, because it extends the iService collection. It gets passed in the current web application builder, the Swagger options and the identity options. And then it just calls the add Swagger gen. So that was the same method you saw in the .NET default template. But now we configure JSON a little bit more using even more extension method. But here you can see the order of things. So first we do the versioning, which means we now have to tell Swagger, hey Swagger, you don't know it, but we know that we added versioning to our ASP.NET Core API. And now, hey Swagger, when you generate those OpenAPI files, Swashbuckle I mean, you need to version them as well. You need to be aware that I have version 1 and version 2. That is why I need to do it. So here is use versioning. What is it doing? First thing is, it goes to the services, builds the service provider, which is, it usually generates a warning, by the way, but I don't know a better way to do it. So it builds the service provider before it even builds the app. I know, not the best thing. Again, I don't know how else during my ramp up, because I'm still in the services section of my app, I can get a handle on the API version description provider. This is something which comes from the ASP versioning package. So if he was able to get this provider, which in fact means, hey, give me access to that information which is configured into API versioning, the step I explained to you before, then this is kind of the logic to go from 0.2 to 1.0 in my example, and create something called OpenAPI info. So OpenAPI info is a type which comes from in this case, I think Swashbuckle, maybe ASP.NET, and this is exactly the same type here, which will be continue to be used in .NET 9. You will see that later when we do the second part. But this is exactly the same type. All we do is we map our Swagger options where API name is in and the API versions are in and so on. We map this to an OpenAPI type, and then we tell Swashbuckle to generate Swagger doc. The naming is all over the place here because this is not Swagger. This is OpenAPI, but anyways. And then group name will be the version, v1, v2, whatever, and then this is the information about it. I think so, at least. So the group name coming from the API descriptor. Okay, so this is going through all supported APIs which are configured into the API versioning and generates an OpenAPI info for each of them and adds it to the Swagger documentation. So this is how version 1, version 2 is translated here in .NET 8, is translated into different JSON files. v1 JSON, v2 JSON, if you will. This is what you need to do. Okay, this is use versioning. Let's go and do the next one. This was use versioning, got it. Let's skip use OAuth. Let's do the custom operation IDs first, because this is the simplest one. This method actually I didn't write. This is actually, let me put that on top maybe, because it's the simplest of all of these versions. It's hard to read a little bit because it's all in one line. But what it does is I apply an operation ID for every operation that comes in. Let me put a breakpoint here to see when it happens, so that you understand what even is going on. Let me debug my API. And you will see it will hit this breakpoint pretty fast. Here it is, even before the Swagger is generated, which is different to the .NET 9 experience, by the way, but we'll see that. And now what you get is, I open my locals windows. E is something called, what is it? It's of type API description. So it injects an API description and it will hit this breakpoint for every endpoint that you have. So every public method in every controller which has an HTTP whatever attribute on it. So it will hit it. And what it will do, or what it gets, this thing, it gets metadata about your endpoint that he's currently looking at. So currently he's looking into version 2 of the endpoint, and he's looking into, when you look into the action descriptor, it tells you kind of the .NET side. It's get next days is the action name he deduced. It's on the weather forecast controller. It has the .NET method info here, so you know which method, public method is it, and so on. So you get all the values. You have route values, like here, get next days on weather forecast controller. Here are the route values. So with that information, what I simply do is I just get the controller name to lower, and then, or unknown, which is wrongly typed, as I can see. Unknown, I need an N. And then he adds a dash, and then from the descriptor the route value, or again, wrong, unknown. I will do that in a second. And then dash, and then the HTTP method to lower or unknown. So let me quickly fix my typo here. And let's do unknown, so that I quickly fix that. So that is what's going to happen, and this is how this operation ID is built, which is easily forgotten by people because you don't see it in the Swagger UI. I mean this value. This is very important because in order to get a clean OpenAPI conformant description, it usually demands you to have explicit operation IDs, and every operation, every path, every endpoint needs its own operation ID. So I build it, you know, kind of from the back to the front. Weather forecast is a controller, so that alphabetically seen, all the controller methods are by each other. And then get next days. This get is a little bit all over the place. You should write a logic to replace this with HTTP verb, whatever. And then the get thing here. So in order to make it better, just make it live. It's a YouTube tutorial, so we can... Let's do it better, so better readable. E moves to, nobody can read this. So what we do is controller equals, so let's do it correctly, to lower invariant or unknown. This is what we have, var action equals, let me do that right for you. So let's do that together, a little bit of coding. Just a little happy accident, like Bob Ross would have said. So that is that. And let's do the HTTP method in front, because we can utilize this in a second, as you can see. So I'm just getting this out. Var method equals this. So now what I can do, I can replace this by saying, yeah, actually, please return a string which is controller dash action dash method. So this is the same, this should be the same code as before. I just have to make it simpler. Let me format this a little bit for you. So this is should be the same. E moves to, and then this is missing, parenthesis, as always. I'm a big parenthesis missing guy. Is that correct? No, it's not. This should be okay. Oh, it's Visual Studio lagging. Okay, whatever. So here you go. But now, why did I do it? What I can do now is, in that action thingy, I can, if I have something here, I can replace method by string empty. So let's see if it works first, and then I might explain it real quick. So what I am hopefully achieving now, if I look into my Swagger JSON, is that, yeah, now this get here in front was removed, because what I do, I first generate this, and then what I say, if you find this string somewhere in that string, just remove it. That's what I did. And so now you don't have this duplicate stuff. It's the weather forecast next day's endpoint, and it's a get endpoint. This is, for instance, what you can do to make it more elegant. So this is the code. I will leave it in so you can have it. So now we have custom operation IDs. We have versioning. Let's do the XML file thingy next, and then head over to use OAuth. So talking about XML files. So XML file is, this is an often asked question on things like Stack Overflow. It was a question we saw a lot of answers, different answers, and this was kind of hard-coded all the time. It doesn't need to. And when you are in .NET, you can utilize this technology called reflection to ask questions about the thing that runs currently, so your stuff. So what we do here, let's go step by step to finally explain that. So what we want to have, first of all, this use XML file is saying that we want those things retrieve weather forecast data and stuff like valid weather data, blah, blah, blah. We want this not to write manually, but we want this to be deduced from the stuff we write in our .NET, like retrieves weather data, the weather data, valid weather data, all those strings. It's a good idea because we write it once in a summary, and you should do it, summaries if you ask me, but just my opinion. And then in .NET, we have this nice thing that we have the documentation written down. This is exactly the string there on top, the summary string. It returns the weather data. Of course, this is not very nice here because it's a very simple endpoint, but you know, it's nice. And when I have the same here on my interface, as you can see, I have retrieves a collection of weather forecasts for the given location, location being formatted because it's referencing the parameter location. Nice. So I have a nice documentation. By adding this line, which we talked about, what actually happens is that in my bin folder, if I look, I'm already in that bin folder. Bin debug.NET 9 is wrong .NET 8. So here, this is the output. Let me just quickly remove those folders. Let me actually remove the whole bin folder for you. So I'm in my services Swagger, I'm in the folder here, and this is now having no bin folder. If as soon as I build this project, just build it, not even rebuild, it regenerates a bin folder. That's what's happening. You probably know. Debug, then .NET 8, whatever is set up here. And then this is what gets copied over. This is actually my application. This is my web application, okay? So here you have a bunch of DLLs, the most of them coming through NuGet packages or .NET Framework or whatever, like Azure Identity is kind of a dependency. And then what we have is this API versioning, and then services, whatever. And this is what I set as a assembly name, API versioning, dot, and then whatever project name it is. And as you can see, here it is. So, and then there is, besides other stuff, there's this XML file, API conversion services Swagger XML. And if I look it up in Notepad++, let's say, this is what the .NET build system generates for me. It generates this XML thing, and it has all the summaries in it bound to where is the summary defined. So that's it. There's a bunch of tools, not only Swashbuckle, a bunch of other tools can, for instance, generate out of that files, because it's simple XML transformation. They transform this XML to HTML, which is a straightforward process. Then from applying some formatting on it, and what you get out is printable documentation, PDF documentation. There are tools doing that with this. So if you are in a situation that you need to go code documentation, well, if you decided pretty early in the process to document your methods, types, and so on, like in this manner, and this is a simple way, then you have a good head start. Let's say it this way. So now, the problem, although, with this is currently my endpoints are documented, but sadly, my models are not. So weather forecast is a schema which references this model, and I have the data here, but it's not visible here. You see, it's not described. So let me do something and then explain it to you. In those settings where I have it, somewhere here, I commented out this line. Let me comment it in, and let me state, disclaimer here again, this here is a little bit dangerous. A little bit. Be careful, do it better than I show it here, but this is a good starting point. You can start. So if I do that now and look at my documentation again, all of a sudden I get model documentation, which is very, very useful, especially if you share. You have the description of the whole type. And now all of a sudden you have the OpenAPI documentation down here, which now has descriptions for every property of every model you have. And that is something which should make you very happy. So how does it work? Condition for that is, so the reason it wasn't there before was that I moved my model out of my assembly. So that means because the weather forecast is not part of my Service Swagger project, which should be the norm in every legit project. You don't have your models all in your services project, should not. So if you move it out, that means that the MS build process, which generates the XML file for this Services Swagger, is not detecting the type inside of it, and thus is not generating this this data. But now, when I go to logic models, I also added the hint to generate a documentation file in logic models, as you can see. So what I did now is I went to my extension and added this method join XML commands, which simply says, well, I pass in the base path, which is my bin folder and bin debug net 8. And then I pass in what the assembly file is currently. This is the file for which will be API conversion services swagger.xml. This is this file. I pass in the file. So what this method does, and you can do it better, it gets all XML files in the directory, and it says it generates an X document, loads the XML file in it, and then it does some XML magic to load all the other files. So if it's the same file, it just skips it. And it says, okay, I'm loading now the other files, and then I will just append all the doc members to the other file and overwrite your commands file. So in the end, what happens is, let me rebuild my solution. And let's have a look at my XML. And as you can see, here should nowhere the weather model is not here. Or is it weather forecast? Excuse me, weather forecast. So here is the member, this is the controller. This is also the controller, but there is no weather forecast model in it. But as soon as I start my API, because this method joins it together, when I go back, he says, hey, somehow this file was changed. I say, yeah, open it. And this file is now far longer. And what I did is, here, as you can see, I pretty much appended the content of another XML file, which is in the same directory, And I just find this file, and now he adds the thing for the model. That is what I did. So you can have a calm look for yourself inside of that. Result is this, which I highly like. So why did I say that this is dangerous? Please do more sophisticated stuff during runtime, because we saw situations where, because we overwrite the same file, at some point in time, this file starts to grow and grow and grow. He's not, after restarts and restarts, he adds all of that to the file. So probably it's a better idea to do it with a different file. I'm just saying, be careful about that. I might change this behavior later before I release this file, so that he uses always another XML file, not this one. And then this should be good. But you know, it's a thing which is nice. It only runs on startups, so it should not affect the overall performance of your application during runtime, because this file is only generated once. But you know, you need to be careful on situations like that. Okay, but it's very helpful. Nice. So last thing which we need to explain, let me here at SwaggerGen, is use OAuth. So use OAuth now says, this is the thing where people tend to run out of the room and say, I don't like it. So assuming that you created your app registration, in this case in Entra ID, assuming that you did that, this thing goes here and says, hey, just give me the Swagger options, which is basically whatever is standing here. And then he says, give me the identity options, which is everything which is stored under Azure AD. So you need to do it this plus this. And as you can see, you need to add some information using user secrets, which I will put into the README. And you need to put your tenant ID in. And I obviously did it because it works, but I don't want to live to have this living on GitHub in the source code. That's why I went to user secrets. However, now when you have everything configured correctly, you can execute this. This is what I wrote for you. And this shows you that the general steps you need to take are two steps. In order to tell the Swagger generation, be aware, only the generation, not the UI. The UI is another story, Swagger UI. This is only Swagger generation. And Swagger generation, which is, in other words, responsible for generating this document. And let me go here and let me show you. And we are now talking about this and that. Okay, this is what we need to generate. So first of all, we need to generate the so-called security scheme. So what happens here, this is not called scheme, it's called definition. And what it says is, this is, you know, you can create as many security schemes, aka definitions, as you are going to provide on your API. So it might be that you say, well, you can log in using OAuth 2, or you could use SAML, let's say, for instance. So that would mean you have two security schemes and not one. Main thing is that this is a dictionary of security schemes where the key is something you can later refer to. So OAuth 2 is the key. And what I do is I just go to this enum from Microsoft OpenAPI models, and then security scheme OAuth, which gets translated into OAuth 2. So this is the type of scheme I want to use, and there are different ones. And then I need to define a so-called flow, and I am going to use the OpenAPI OAuth flow and flows. And here, because I'm using OAuth, that is, so how is the user guided, the process guided, in order to obtain the token? Inside of that, I have different options. I could use client credentials. I could use implicit flow. I could use password, user password flows. Authorization code happens to be the PXE flow, PKCE. So this is an OpenAPI OAuth flow, which I pass to authorization code so that the security scheme knows, okay, he wants to use not implicit flow, he wants to use PKCE. That means you need to provide an authorization URL, a token URL, and optionally the scopes you want to provide, the scopes of your API, so that he knows what scopes can he use. This is what it looks like then in the end. So we provide free scopes, OpenAPI, OpenID, profile, and this. And this is those two URLs you will get if you go to Entra ID, go to in Entra ID to app registrations blade, and then on top you will see a menu point which is called endpoints. If you click that, you get the OAuth 2 authorization URL and the OAuth 2 token URL, which is basically always this pattern, and all you need to do is you place your tenant ID inside of this string. And then when you have this in place, all is good. You can paste it in here. And what I did is I'm just building it, okay? I just say, this is basically the instance, https login.microsoftonline.com. So this is where you log in against, followed by the tenant ID, followed by the suffix. And this is different in token URL and this. So this is all you do. And when you configure that in the add security definition of the Swagger Gen options, then basically what you do is you inject this thing. This thing, where is it? This security scheme, this here, is injected. So then it sits here like in the library and gets referenced, which is the same like with the other scheme, the model. So we have a weather forecast schema, which is not a security schema, but a data schema. And then whenever needed, this gets referenced by this technology saying, hey, when valid weather data is the endpoint and it returns, or it has an array of what? What is the array? The array is of this type. So this is a reference to the same document / components schemas weather forecast. Okay, cool. If that is true, then this weather forecast schema is here component schemas weather forecast, whereas this is now not a data schema, but a security scheme, scheme, whatever. And this happens to be under the key OAuth. Nice. Now the last thing is, and this is a little bit wrongly did by me, and we will do it better in OpenAPI. I don't know how to do it in Swagger. I never did it. I explained the point. Now we add a requirement or requirements. So what this means is, okay, we got the security definition, but we need to tell OpenAPI when this definition is required. And what we decided to do, we don't make it conditional for, hey, on this method you need to do it, on that method you don't need to do it. We just say it's a general requirement, and we do that by referencing the already created security scheme. So we reference a security scheme. This is not a reference to model. This is a reference to a scheme in OpenAPI. And the ID, where do we point it, is this OAuth 2. This is the same key here, the name of blah, 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 which results in OAuth 2. It's the same that we used, where did we use it? Here, as the key of the security definition. So that resulted in this string. And this security requirement, when we add it, this gets added here. And here you can see this is the requirement. And it says this thing, which this string is pointing to this. So he knows, okay, that's what you mean. And then those things are required. Those scopes are required, which are the same scopes I think we defined here. So this is what we do. If I omit this second step, let's say I omit this so that you believe me. If I omit this, it will still generate valid OpenAPI JSON. If we visit it now, it should generate the schemas, but he leaves out the requirement. He says, no. I know the scheme, but it's not required. Whereas when I redo that, what I basically say, this is globally required. This is a security requirement for every endpoint and not a single one. You can do it differently. I don't even know how to do it in Swagger because I can show you why it's not so important for me. If I go here and try this out, whatever, Germany execute, because I'm logged in currently, he is having the bearer token here, always, because he thinks it's always required to be authorized. So I don't even know if I log out, now I'm logged out, and I do execute, he says 401, because in my, that's the wrong one, in my controller, I said this controller is authorized only, and the method also is authorized. So what happens if I say, no, you totally, this method, the controller is authorized, but I override this method to say you can call this without being authorized. So now what happens is I can, without authorizing myself, I can execute whatever, Denver again. I can execute this. No bearer token is here because he understands that I don't need to apply the requirement because this method has allow anonymous on it. But if I add authorization to it, selecting only my scopes, now Azure gave me a token with Pixie, and I execute again, he will still send the bearer token. That is because I applied the global requirement to the security, and that is why he now always thinks, oh, probably this method requires the bearer token. So if I have one, I will send it anyways, even if allow anonymous is on the method. This is the only downside of this approach. Okay, so but it makes my life easier, and I don't know how to do it in Swagger. That's why I never did it. I hope you understand what I'm saying, because we are pretty deep into Swagger right now. Okay, so if you followed me along until this point and you try to reproduce it, you will fail, because there's one quirky thing now. The quirky thing is, you have seen that everything now is defined in the OpenAPI file, but still Swagger refuses to overtake all those settings just like that in its UI, Swagger UI. So the last thing you need to do is, this is my last extension method. After I ejected all those middlewares that I need to do, I created this last extension method, which is used to actually put in the Swagger middlewares. So it uses Swagger, in order to create the JSON file. And then it says, I also want the UI. And as you can see, I always do it, even if it's not development. It's easily checkable. But as I said in the entry, I don't know why I should disable it. Probably I'm dumb, but you know, that's my life. So now what I do is I get the identity options. Remember, this is going to the Azure AD app settings and retrieving whatever is there. I say, this is, by the way, bad. I should do it better with the Swagger options dot API name. Let me fix that real quick. It was fixed there. And then what he says, if there are any API versions, first of all, he again gets the API description provider, and he needs to add the endpoints, the Swagger endpoints, so that he understands that he should generate Swagger JSONs for every version that I have. So this is how you tell it, hey, in Swagger UI, the endpoints are per version on a different thing. This is not generating the endpoints per se. This is done by use Swagger. This is telling the UI where to find the Swagger JSON for it. I think you'll still need it. Anyways, after this is done, for reasons I don't totally understand, you need to tell the UI options some stuff that they should be able to deduce from the already configured OpenAPI Swagger JSON. So if I disable this, again, this is already configured, right? But if I disable this block, watch what happens if I try to authorize myself with the UI. Empty ID, but he has weirdly enough, some information, like this information is there, but client ID is missing. And now, even if I add the client ID here manually, you could say, that's not bad. Let me add it here, hit the button, and it will not work. It will give you this AAD STS error, which is a proof key for code exchange is required, blah, 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 for cross-origin. So it's not working pretty good. So that was my company login page. But if I add this again, so one thing he does, this is my enable persist authorization, which is the reason why I didn't have to re-log in. If you ask yourself, why is he having still a bearer token when he opens a fresh page? So this is using cookies to be able to persist this authorization. And then I have this OAuth use Pixie, which is kind of weird because what I really should do is something like if the identity options use Pixie is true, then use Pixie. So what do I mean? The identity options are the Microsoft identity options, which are mapped from the app settings, Azure AD, and here I have used Pixie set to true. So I shouldn't just dumbly override and set this to Pixie. I should adhere to whatever is set up here. So that's it. That is the whole story, how I created this UI in the old world. So as I said, I will share this. I will show you in a README what you need to do in order to bring this to life. And this is part 1. I now decided that I will do the .NET 9 stuff in part 2. So there will be another video upcoming pretty soon. And then you have it. So with that, basically, we can conclude that, okay, that was a long journey. I talked about configuration and I spent a lot of time talking over what I don't like of the default template and what you could do and should do in order to bring more order in what way ever to your APIs. I still think this is an important topic. Otherwise, I wouldn't have brought it up, of course, but important because so many people learn APIs now using minimal APIs and blah, 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 which is nice, but not understanding what's behind the scenes and what this is basically syntactic sugar doing exactly the same stuff. It's kind of a dangerous situation we get into because people tend to forget, especially in AI times, how is this working? What is this taking away from me? Which burden takes it away? And not knowing the burden now when it comes to special situations always leaves people puzzled and wondering what's going on and so on. And I don't like that situation at all. That is why I'm bringing this up. Anyways, next time we actually talk about .NET 9, we proceed with the presentation, and then we have a full-fledged picture of what really changed. Thanks for listening and hope you enjoyed, and see you next time.